Hello, my name's Rob and I'm part of the clergy team here in Portishead. Welcome to our thought for this week. I wonder whether you've ever discovered the book of Ecclesiastes. It nestles in the middle of our Bibles, in the heart of the Old Testament, amongst writing that we generally call wisdom literature. If you have found it, you probably found a rather mysterious book. It's a book that we read and wonder whether it really ought to have its place in the Bible. A couple of passages best known are the opening words, which in my version read, "Vanity, vanity, all is vanity," or in some other translations, "Meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless." This is surprising stuff to find in the pages of Holy Scripture. The other passage is one that we're going to be looking at in just a moment, and it's a passage that I was asked to talk to in our school's worship in Trinity and St. Peter's this week, and it reminded me of what a rich and wonderful passage it is. I would say, if you don't know Ecclesiastes, do go and have a read of it. It is written by somebody who's searching after truth, and it's really honest and raw, and as I said, at times surprising. But I'm going to read this passage from Ecclesiastes 3, which you may be familiar with, if not from the pages of Scripture, then as a song, and it was a hit many years ago for a band called the Byrds, and it goes like this. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Well, your first response may be like mine, that there are some words there that we find quite surprising, that there might possibly be a time to kill and a time to hate. These are not things that we expect to find in the Bible, but I would say, sit lightly to that. This is a poem and it's designed to make us think and to challenge us, and sometimes thinking about those things is important. It doesn't mean that it's suggesting that these things are good. But it begins with the words, "For everything there is a season." And as we think about seasons, then, well, we might, if we're football fans, think about the fact that we're now out of the football season. It's not a time of year that we play football in. We may more likely think about the seasons of the year: summer, autumn, winter and spring. And we find ourselves at the edge of summer. And if, like me, you've planted anything this year, then you'll be familiar with the truth of the fact that there is a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to sow seeds and a time to harvest. This is true. Within the church, we use seasons slightly differently. We have seasons represented by different colours. Seasons like Advent and more so Lent are times of kind of minor key, times when it's okay to mourn, it's okay to weep, when we we say to people, come to church now. We won't make you pretend that you're happy, because you may not be. Whereas other times in the year, like Christmas and Easter, we wear white or gold as a sign of celebration and joy and happiness and laughter. And while we don't confine ourselves too much to these things, it is helpful to know that actually the seasons of the year reflect some of the seasons of our moods. And this is something that's very much there within this little passage, a recognition that there are times when we do feel sad, times when we mourn, but also times when we are joyful and happy, and that's right. But we also think about seasons of life, and I think of that image. I think it was Shakespeare who talked about the 7 ages of man, and there are definitely points of change as we grow up from infanthood to childhood to adolescence into adulthood to being at our prime, and then slowly as we begin to grow older, when we lay things down, when we retire, and when our bodies perhaps don't quite move and act as they used to. And this also is here in this passage, times when we have to set things down, times when our bodies do not work in the way that they used to, times when we recognize that, well, actually, we're not the people that we were. And these are challenging times when we need to learn to be dependent on others in a way that, well, we feel uncomfortable being. And so there is a sense in which this beautiful poem in Scripture speaks truth into our lives. It recognizes that actually our lives are not constant. Think of those promises that we make when we get married, that we promise to be with one another, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, for better, for worse. Life does throw those challenges at us. And this is a passage that just reminds us that this is the way it is. That life has different seasons, and we're challenged to respond to those. And so I think this passage reminds us of a couple of things that, well, which are self-evidently true, but really important to be reminded of. One is, I think, what we now talk about as resilience, and the wisdom literature in the Old Testament is very good at helping us to do this, encouraging us to be wise, to recognize that life is not constant, that it is changing, and that we need to be resilient, to be able to meet those challenges, and not to feel that there is some injustice at play here, but to recognize that is part of the rhythm of life, the way the seasons of life work out. I think the other thing I'd want to say to us who are part of the church is that what we need in order to respond to these seasons is community. We need people around us who can support us when difficult times happen, when we are in seasons of death or grief or mourning, when we are throwing away, or when we find ourselves in conflict. And the church is uniquely placed to do that, and I think our church does it really well. But to recognize that that's our role, to support one another in seasons of life that are challenging and hard. And so I do hope and pray that that may be something that we continue to do well, and to support one another in those challenging times of life. So, my friends, may God bless you.